Good morning, all. We just a few comments here this morning. Obviously, we've got another round of visitors to the Capitol today, and that's good. That's what's great about America. It's a chance to express our positions. I know that the WS have about 13,000, maybe more like that. That amount of argument today. The bottom line is that's a fraction of the 300 or so thousand state and local government employees we have, good professionals who work at the state and local level. And obviously that's a much smaller fraction of the 500 million people who live and work here in the state of Wisconsin, both in and out of government. And certainly we appreciate the fact that the folks here today are going to have their voices heard. We also want to make sure the taxpayers of the state of Wisconsin have their chance to have their voice heard. And so we're going to talk a little bit about where we're at and where we're headed over the next couple of days. First off, I want to talk a little bit. Yesterday, I spent a good chunk of my day starting out early in the morning and making my way after voting in Wauwatosa, making my way around to essentially all the different corners of the state of Wisconsin. And as part of that, I went to manufacturing plants, mainly mid and small-sized employers in the state, and talked about what we're doing with jobs, and talked about specifically what we're doing with this budget repair bill as we prepare for the next annual budget. And I got to tell you, almost to a person, that these companies, including at least one company that also has union membership involved with it, people view what we're proposing as being modest. Employer-wise, the manufacturers we visited, employees were paying, in many cases, anywhere from 25% to 50% of their health care premiums. When I was at my last stop in La Crosse, and we had a similar type of group protesting outside, I pointed out then that what we're asking for in terms of state and local governments to make in terms of health care contribution is half of what the guys at plants like that were making, and much less even than some of the other plants we visited along the way. In addition, when you look at the pension contribution we're requesting, the 5.8%, again, most workers outside of government view that as being pretty generous. At a number of the plants we visited yesterday, most of them had 401ks, and many of them had suspended the employee contribution from the employer, excuse me, the employer contribution from the companies themselves over the last year or so because of the tough economic times that we're in, as a means of trying to protect as many jobs as possible. So outside of government, for the past year and a half to 2 years, employers have been doing this already. This is not something unusual. This is something that, again, middle-class workers in this state have experienced. And the bottom line is we're asking, really in many ways, not only nothing less, but or nothing more, I should say, but in many cases much less than what many people, many middle-class working citizens in the state are already paying to keep and preserve jobs at their companies outside of government. A couple other things that were interesting. One of the stops yesterday I made, I would always take time to say hi to each of the employees that took the time out to listen to us. One of them came up to me, a gentleman, and said, you know, my wife works for the state government. So of course I kind of expected, okay, here it comes. I was ready to get an earful. And he said, you know, she just started working a couple years back, and we were overwhelmed as to how generous our employee benefits were. That she said at the time, it's only a matter of time before they wake up and have to realize they have to adjust this in order to keep the government going. So instead of being upset with us in our proposal, she said, or he said, that the two of them supported us. They thought it was the right thing to do, it was the right way to move this state forward. And we heard a lot of it. Obviously, there's plenty of voices who are being heard, and were heard in one of the longest committee hearings I can remember of, at least at the time I served in the legislature. And again, that's all fine. It's part of democracy, and we're willing to listen to folks and their concerns. But the bottom line is the taxpayers of the state need to be heard as well. The last thing we want to do to balance this next budget, which has a $3.6 billion deficit in it, is balance on the backs of middle-class taxpayers with higher taxes that would drive people and jobs out of the state of Wisconsin. That's why we're pushing with a much better alternative. And we certainly don't want to lay off people at a time. We don't need any layoffs, be it in the public or the private sector. We don't want to make the kind of choices that they're being forced to make in places like New York and California and other states where they're cutting billions of dollars from state aids to local governments, school districts, and the university system in those respective states. For us, this is a much better alternative as we head into the two-year budget proposal we're going to put out on the table next Tuesday. A couple other quick things, and then I'll take some questions. And people ask, well, what's the impact on this on workers? One of the things I cannot stress enough, because I think it's something that even many of the people outside don't fully recognize, and that is the civil service system in Wisconsin was in place long before collective bargaining. It will remain fully intact long after this measure is passed. The protections that workers have, be they in a union or not, that are derived from the civil service system continue. They include merit hiring, they include just cause for discipline and termination. Those things do not change. I found more than a large number of employees I've talked to who somehow think that comes from their collective bargaining agreement. Those provisions may be codified in their collective bargaining agreements, but they don't exist because in the last turn of the century, Wisconsin passed the strongest civil service protections in the country. Those are not removed. And in fact, if anything, one of the things we've talked about with lawmakers in the last day or so, after some of the comments they've heard, is other ways to further make that clear. That applies at both the state and the local level. Those are the sorts of things we're willing to discuss, because again, we don't want to alter the civil service system. We want to protect workers. I believe along the way, the biggest changes workers will see into the future later this year, if this is fully enacted, is that, like all of us, myself included, my cabinet, the legislature, and others, will all be paying slightly more for pension, although, again, what most people are paying on national average, we'll all be paying a little bit more when it comes to health care, although, again, about half of what the premium contribution is on the national average. And union members, specifically workers who were previously part of the union, will find that in the end they don't have to have their union dues automatically deducted from the payroll. And for many of those employees, that means $500, $600 or more potentially that they could use to offset those higher health care and pension costs. So all in all, they've got all that. They have civil service protection. There'll be no furloughs. The Doyle furloughs end in this budget. In the Walker budget for the years to come, there will be no furloughs in the future, which was the equivalent under Governor Doyle's budget of about a 3% reduction in pay. And there won't be massive layoffs of state and local workers to balance our budget. The final thing I just want to point out, we'll give you a copy of this for those who want, but the other thing I keep hearing about is, this is some great surprise. Again, I've been talking about this all throughout the campaign. In fact, one of the unions actually sent, one of the many flyers that went out to union members all across the state, suggesting that they should not vote for me in the election. In fact, they pulled out some quotes from the media. One was from my website, where it said, you've got to free up local government officials to not be strangled by things like mediation and arbitration. Another quote was from the Journal Sentinel, where it says, Walker says he intends to void parts of labor contracts. Another quote from the paper was also from our campaign saying, we'd like to take the choice out of the collective bargaining process. All these were flyers that were sent before the November 2nd election. That's because I've been talking about this all throughout the campaign. I've been talking about it before, talking about it since. I've been talking in the same context about the fact that I believe we've got good, decent, hard-working people who work in government. But I also recognize the balance of the budget. There's got to be some fairness, and we've got to be in balance with where the taxpayers are who foot the bill for all of us in government. And that's something that's been clearly relevant throughout this campaign, throughout the several months of the transition, and certainly in about the 6 weeks I've been in office.